Right, so today we are going to be talking again about Indian rums, and as you can see, I've got just about everything I have in the storeroom here, which includes the Kamikara 12, the 8, the 3, the Old Monk 12, the Old Monk Original XXX. I've got a new one called Marizai. I've got the Mandarkini here. I've got the McDowell's from Diageo's subsidiary United Spirits. So, there's a fair bit. So the problem with Indian rums has always been, of course, that they are pretty much into the local market only. And because of that, they tend to go mass market rather than any kind of serious quality. That's starting to change. And of course, Old Monk was one of the vanguards of that. Amrut was another. And gradually we are starting to see more interesting, younger companies coming up with pot stills and modern technology to try and make something that's more than just palm oil or some sort of adulterated miscellaneous crap. However, today we're going to stick with the old stuff. And we're going to talk about a company called Mohan Meakin, which makes this little sucker called the Old Monk 12-year-old. Now, this is a company that's got a really long background, and it's too long to get into. I'll put the link to the company biography in the show notes. The bottom line is it was created around 1855 by a gentleman called Abraham Dreyer. And he's actually the father of a rather famous or infamous general called Reginald Dreyer, who was in charge of the Amritsar massacre in the early 1900s in India. But be that as it may, he always wanted to create a brewery, and he started one in this little town called Kasauli, which is just around the area of Shimla in northern India, in Himalaya Pradesh, I think it is. And he created this brewery with stuff that he had shipped over from England, and then moved it down to the south where there was a better supply of water and there was a closer cantonment of soldiers from the John Company. And that's the company that he created. And it was so successful selling beer during the 1800s that he expanded all over northern India, where the climate was conducive to growing hops, grains, and so on. And they made whiskeys like Solan No. 1. They made the India Pale Ale and other beers of that nature. Very, very successful stuff. But rum was always considered like that stuff that you put down at the bottom, and it never really made a big splash until the independence happened in 1948, and a gentleman by the name of Narendranath Mohan bought the company from the Meakins, who had by now bought it in 1887 and were now running the joint. And they didn't change the name until 1966 to Mohan Meakin for obvious reasons. But they, in the 1950s, decided that they were going to start looking at making rum of their own. And the rums that they made they wanted to make it like an upscale drink, which was, again, quite a first, right? They wanted to market it to five-star hotels. They certainly had a contract with the army. The family had strong connections with the military. And as a consequence, they made this rum called the Old Monk. Now, it's always been a bit of a mystery as to where that came from. I mean, company legend, which you can believe or may not believe, talks about Vedratan Mohan having been inspired by the old Benedictine monks where he had seen in Europe, or some old guy who had always been part of the distillery apparatus in northern India and part of their distilleries. Hard to tell. Let's just take it as a company legend. They called it Old Monk. That's pretty much it. Now, they've always gone at 42.8%, and which is equivalent to 75 proof in the old system. And that seems to be almost like a standard in India. A lot of rums use that to this day in the subcontinent. Old Monk that we are looking at today is, as far as I know, made on pot stills, but it's hard to tell because they've got so many of them. And it is at 42.8%, and it really is an interesting thing. Made from molasses, of course. They don't have any cane juice rums. Kamikara is one of the first that does this kind of thing. So there's very little that I can actually tell you about the production process of it. I don't know about the fermentation. I don't know where the molasses comes from, what part of India, in other words, because I'm sure it's all completely locally made. But it is a very interesting rum for something that's 12 years old. And there's something very consistent about Indian rums. They all smell of honey and a little bit of palm oil and ghee, and the sort of smoky oil that goes in a wok after it starts to hit past the smoking point. There's also a fair amount of peaches and syrups. There's some sweetness in there. Really nice stuff. It really isn't all that different from rums that we know from the West Indies, except for one thing. It lacks that kind of slightly higher esterness that we are kind of getting used to nowadays. And it's got a more of a leather scent, and stuff like peaches in some kind of syrup. This one in particular has got some weird stuff in it because it almost feels like it's got some fusel oil in the background, which I don't understand, but that's what it is. When you taste it, on the other hand, that's not bad. It's a bit on the sharp side, not much. I mean, you can drink it neat. There's no question about it. It's what it's made for. It's 12 years old after all, right? It's got a certain kind of thickness to it. It's got honey. It's got a whole bunch of spices like cinnamon and a little bit of vanilla, brown sugar, caramels, that kind of thing. It's not particularly complex, but it's a really nice drink. I could go on about it, but I've reviewed this thing before, as well as the 7-year-old that you see in front of the little stubby bottle here, so I'm not going to go much further. I'm simply going to say that I kind of score this around 83, 84 points. The 7-year-old scored 7 to 9 as a comparator. I think this one is definitely better. One interesting thing about the bottle that I want to mention is that they actually have the manufacturing date on it, which is a blessing to a guy like me, because I never know from this type of label it has whether it's old or it's new or whatever. But this one was made in... I'll tell you exactly when. It was made in March of 2023, so we know when it was manufactured, and that's just such a blessing. So that's it for today, and we're going to go with some of these other Indian rums in a short while, but I thought I'd start off with this one, which is more familiar to most, especially to the diaspora, and do have a good time, and we'll talk to you next time.